distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. It is with great pleasure we welcome you all to the second day of this 3-day virtual webinar series organized by the British Council in Sri Lanka and the Sri Lankan government together with the INMS, UKRI, CH, SASEP and South Asian Nitrogen Hub, mainly aiming at mobilizing action on nitrogen for climate and green recovery in preparation for COP26 with the common goal of achieving achieving a net zero by 2050. As mentioned, it is with great pleasure myself and Ms. Keesje co-chair this today's event. I'm Sarat Nissanka, like Dr. Claire mentioned. I'm a professor at the University of Peradeniya, Sri Lanka, and involved in research activities of the South Asian Nitrogen Hub activities. Now, may I invite our co-chair, Ms. Keesje, to introduce herself first and to commence the next item of today's agenda.
Hi, everyone. Hello, everybody. It's wonderful to see you all here today. My name is Keesje Avis, and I work for a small food justice charity in Scotland called Nourish Scotland. We've been working on nitrogen both here in Scotland, but also with the GCRF South Asia Nitrogen Hub for the last few years, as it is a really important subject, not just for researchers or politicians, but also for civil society. And I'm really looking forward to today's activities.
Ladies and gentlemen, just as a recap of yesterday's event, we had a very productive and thoughtful, provoking session yesterday. Honorable ministers from several South Asian countries, excellencies from several high commissions and embassies, and also executive officers from several leading UN conventions expressed their willingness, need of urgent action and commitment in addressing these reactive nitrogen related issues. Even some countries have taken several steps to meet the Colombo Declaration target of halving nitrogen losses by 2030. It was great news that we heard during yesterday's event. As we know, nitrogen is everywhere, invisible, and some reactive nitrogen forms are essential for life, but losses and misuse of them cause numerous long-term negative impacts. It was highlighted by several that the lack of knowledge on nitrogen and its impact as one of the major barriers for developing solutions to minimize impacts. In order to achieve targets of net zero by 2050, addressing reactive nitrogen issues are a must. Ladies and gentlemen, for that, the status of the ground level realities and clear understanding of these issues at local, regional, and global level is very much needed in order to convince the high-level policymakers to make decisions to address these issues as early as possible. Therefore, today's webinar is dedicated for multi-actor dialogue on climate and nitrogen, where related key experts provide their experiences, evidences, and views from range of perspectives and sectors, including science, policies, and also views of non-governmental organizations and community-based organizations, and also business community perspectives. So therefore, today's program is arranged as 2 sessions. First session being the presentations of invited speakers covering 4 themes, of theme 1 being the evidence and impacts, theme 2 being the current policies and practices, theme 3 being the options for solution, and 3 and 4 is for the raising awareness among policymakers, NGOs, and business. So then usually after completing the presentation of each theme, there will be 5 minutes questions and answering, which will be moderated by the co-chair, Ms. Kesha. So Dr. Claire has already mentioned how the question is done by the audience. Usually after the completion of invited presentation under 4 themes, there will be a panel discussion as the second session, again inviting eminent leaders in the sectors, and that session will be chaired by Ms. Kesha. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, while wishing a very productive session, may I now invite the first presenter of the first theme of evidence and impacts. Our first speaker for this theme is Dr. Ramesh Ramachandran, and he will speak to us on the status of nitrogen impacts across South Asia. And just to give a brief introduction about him, Dr. Ramesh, currently serving as the Director of the National Center for Sustainable Coastal Management of India, and also the Chair of the UNEP's Global Partnership on Nitrogen Management. So may I invite Dr. Ramesh to make his presentation now.
Thank you, Professor Nissanka. Thank you, Mark, and the entire. I think you can see my screen now.
Yes.
Okay. Good afternoon to all of you, and good morning to people from the UK. I just wanted to give some the overview of the impact across South Asia very quickly. I just wanted to see that the South Asia has a huge population in terms of nearly 2 billion, 1.95 billion, and it's one of the fastest growing regions in this world, and nearly about 5% of the world landmass, and nearly 14% of the global arable land, and 2.7% of forest area, and nearly 4% of the world coastline. And it supports 25% of the world population. When you take Asia as a whole, more than 45% of this population. So with this, in the global context, South Asia is main as one of the hotspots for the nitrogen pollution. So in the next 4 minutes, I would like to concentrate on some of the reactive nitrogen, the 4 forms of nitrogen, the NOx, NH3, N2, and NO3 here. Yeah. The NOx, I've used this one from the Edgar and also from the SASAP report, thanks to Roger Raghuram and some of the switches shared. We could see that even though there are a lot of observations as well as the modeling is right now is happening, this is just to give an overall what are the different issues there. Well, I think from the South Asian point of view, NOx seems to be one of the important nitrogen issue which has to be taken, which is about 10 times more powerful than the CO2. And you can see that the entire NOx emissions here, particularly you can see the Indo-Gangetic Plain as well as the shipping routes where the red shows more than 5 to 10 of emissions. And then we also have a lot of health impacts. One of the other partners from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine has given that how this has both respiratory as well as the nitrates. Particularly recently, they have come up with stomach cancer also comes because of the higher concentration of nitrate of more than 10 grams per liter. So what we tried to put here, we looked at this data in 2014 data, and we have seen the percentage of contribution from different sectors. We could see that India is the largest contributor of NOx. But when you look at the individual country, Maldives, followed by Bhutan and Sri Lanka, as in terms of per capita, the emission is high. There are 6 sectors in total, which the main thing which dominates is the road transport, followed by energy, and then the industry, manufacturing, as well as construction. So when I look at this is very recently one paper I saw that when you look at the air quality change in the by 2050, they have run for the NOx as well as the PM 2.5. You can see in by RCP 6 and the 8.5 scenario, where you can see the very high concentration of the air pollution in this part of the continent. When you look at the ammonia, you can see a very high concentration in the Indo-Gangetic plain. Both ammonia and NOx forms together, and then it forms also part of the particulate matter. And this is the Indo-Gangetic plain is the global hotspot for the atmospheric ammonia due to very intense agricultural activities as well as the fertilizer production. Apart from that, there is an eutrophication problem, which I will also address a little later. The ammonia emissions. India is the largest emitter because of the huge population, but you can also see that the agriculture, which is nearly about 45% when you look at together all the 8 countries, and followed by the, you can see the other aspects followed by the agriculture. Except Bhutan as well as the Afghanistan, the agriculture seems to be the higher contributor. So in terms of nitrous oxide, this is almost, I think we heard about more than 300 times more global warming potential when compared to CO2, and also causes depletion of the stratospheric ozone. And we can see that the concentration keep increasing, which is about 331 now. And agriculture, energy, and untreated waste dominate the N2 emissions. And here, India, this is the more recent data for our national communication at NETCOM. We can see that 471 gigagrams per year is from India. And when you look at the individual countries, the Bhutan, Pakistan, and Nepal, per capita wise, it is higher. And here also, we have seen that the soils direct emission, which contributes nearly 60%, and then followed by the indirect N2 emissions from atmospheric deposition of nitrogen in NOx and ammonia. Then followed by the soils, the indirect emissions of 11%. The other aspect we would like to concentrate here is when we're looking at that, we have some of the few dead zones like the Gulf of Mexico, and we have the Arabian Sea, which is very well established. And recently, the paper by the Gupta et al. Has shown that the Arabian Sea dead zone is not linked to the freshwater inflow because the freshwater inflow on the west coast is much lesser. Whereas very recently it has been now discovered there is a huge dead zone, which is about 60,000 square kilometers, almost half of Bangladesh. And here we could see at a depth of even 60-70 meters, the oxygen level has reduced from 5 milligram to less than about 0.032 milligram per liter. So normally that the freshwater inflow, which is coming from the Ganges, Brahmaputra, and Meghna, we have a huge amount of nutrient rich, and there is a thin layer, and then the deep sea, where you have also nutrient-rich waters. Fortunately, there is not enough of mixing during the monsoon summer, so we have a stratified water level. So right now we are in the tipping point, and it is one area when there is going to be a really mixing, there is going to be a huge amount of depletion of fishery resources. So I think one of our task team is to look at using the cruises, establish this concept, or this is based on one single measurements. So we are trying to look at this the dead zone and see how we can come up with some of the scientific data to look at these issues. I think with this I would like to summarize that there are South Asia is really planning as one of the major players in looking at the nitrogen issues on a global scale, and there are many mitigation measures. One is to look at the reduction in vehicular emission. India is also leading in Global Solar Alliance, and also improved management of treated and untreated sewage, for example, waste to wealth and waste to energy. And also there is a rise in the nutrient use efficiency across South Asia. And also, for example, India is using the neem coated area. I think with these few reflections, I would stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ramesh, for very elaborative and coverage given regarding the whole region. So then audience can write questions for Dr. Ramesh if you wish. So now I would like to invite our second speaker, Dr. Himanshu Pathak. His presentation will be on how is nitrogen use affecting and being affected by climate change. Just to give a brief introduction to Dr. Himanshu. So he is the director of the National Institute of Abiotic Stress Management of Indian Council for Agriculture Research. And may I invite now Dr. Himanshu to make the presentation.
Thank you very much. I'll be talking about how is nitrogen use affecting and being affected by climate change. The presentation has been developed with the support from Professor Pete Smith and Dr. Nayak. Of course, nitrogen use affects climate change by two ways. It has got warming effects due to increased emission of nitrous oxide. It increases also methane emission from rice paddies. It also leads to NOx emission and also formation of ozone, which itself is a greenhouse gas. It also has some minor cooling effects due to increase in productivity, leading to carbon sequestration, and also emission of ammonium and NOx contributing to aerosol, and ozone, of course, reduces the lifetime of methane. But out of all of these, the major impact comes from emission of N2O, nitrous oxide, which is generally 1 to 2% of applied nitrogen. If we just very briefly see the contribution of nitrous oxide among the greenhouse gases to climate change, globally N2O contributes around 7%, but in South Asia, particularly India, it is around 5% of total greenhouse gases contributed by nitrous oxide. On the other hand, climate change also affects nitrous oxide emission by affecting soil carbon and nitrogen cycles, by also influencing plant nitrogen demand, and also nitrous oxide emission increases with temperature and precipitation, either individually or collectively. So this is how nitrogen use and climate change both work in both the ways. Now, if you come to the major sources of nitrous oxide emission in South Asia, as Dr. Ramesh just told, the major emission comes from direct emission from managed soils. Secondly, indirect emissions from managed soils. But countries like Maldives and also Sri Lanka, there is a significant amount of emission from the deposition, indirect emission from the deposition. So these are the major sources of emission. Just to give a little bit more information about nitrous oxide emission from agriculture, and taking India as an example, from Indian agriculture, around 77% of nitrous oxide emission comes from fertilizer application, followed by soil mineralization around 9%, and then animal manure and compost around 6% each. Now coming to emission from South Asia, the map shows how much is the emission, but it is increasing. And if you compare the emission in 2015 compared to 2000, there has been 35% increase in the emission. The lower one shows the per capita emission of nitrous oxide in different countries, and you will see it is lowest in Maldives, but countries like Bhutan, Pakistan, and Nepal, they contribute per capita emission quite significantly. We also tried to project how much is going to be the emission in 2030 and 2050. Currently in 2010, it was only 0.58. In business as usual scenario, in 2030, it is going to increase by around 34%, but by 2050, it is going to increase by 60%. But if we try to halve this nitrogen waste, then from 0.58 million ton, it will be reducing to 0.47 million ton in 2030, and further down to 0.441 million ton by 2050. So these are the projections. Now, the question is whether achieving net zero or halving nitrogen waste is feasible. Let me tell you, halving nitrogen waste and achieving net zero emission are ambitious. Sometimes it could be incredibly ambitious because they require drastic reduction in nitrogen use, which is very difficult depending upon the population pressure and the requirement of food and nutrition. Second requirement will be increased nitrogen use efficiency, which is possible up to a certain extent with new technologies, innovations like new molecule, nanofertilizer, urease inhibitor, and so on. But fortunately, there are some success stories in recent years. Number one, as Ramesh also talked about, neem-coated urea in India. Now 100% urea fertilizer is neem-coated. There is also very good success of leaf color chart in India as well as Bangladesh and some other countries. Urea supergranule is also a success in Bangladesh, soil health card program in India, and of course nano nitrogen has already been tested in many farmers' field in India. So these are some of the success stories which will help quite significantly in increasing the efficiency of nitrogen use. These success stories are also being visible on the ground. This is nitrogen use efficiency trend in Indian agriculture. Since 1970, the nitrogen use efficiency was decreasing quite sharply, coming from 67 to 15 kg grain per kg nitrogen use. But if you see in last 10, 15 years, either that efficiency has remained same or it has started showing improving. That means if we adopt all those technologies, certainly the efficiency of nitrogen use is going to increase. So this is in brief, which I wanted to share with all of you. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Dr. Himanshu. So for the excellent presentation. Now we are getting to the third presenter, or the last presenter of the first theme, Miss Aminath Shazly. So she will be talking on the climate and nitrogen threats to coral reef, and she has been a researcher at the University of Maldives, and also she was the former head of the Department of Environmental Science, National University of Maldives. Now may I invite Mr. Aminath to make the presentation.
Good morning and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today I will be talking to you about climate and nitrogen threats to coral reefs. Thank you. I would like to thank for the support of Professor Sandy, Purvaja, and Hana and Nizam for their contribution to this presentation. So I'll be looking at coral reefs, the climate impacts on the reefs, possible impacts of nitrogen, and then the works of South Asian Nitrogen Hub towards this topic. So first of all, if we look at coral reefs, they form a very small part of the ocean, like 0.1% of it, but it is a known home for more than 25% of the marine species. And they have high ecosystem services, accounting for around $350 billion, equivalent to $10 trillion per annum. And they actually provide small-scale fisher services for 100 million fishers, feeding approximately 1 billion people worldwide. So they are known to be very much high resourceful for coastal communities. Unfortunately, due to climate as well as anthropogenic impacts, 30 to 50% of the coral reefs have been lost or severely degraded over the last few decades. So coral reefs, they mainly make up corals, which are tiny animals who have a symbiotic relationship with an algae called the zooxanthellae. The zooxanthellae not only provides the colorfulness to the corals, but it is the main source of food for the corals. Like 90% of the food that the corals require come from this algae. And they are very sensitive organisms which require very specific conditions such as light, a temperature of this specific range, water clarity, and nutrient poor water, which actually is a must for their existence. Moving on to climate impacts on corals, coral bleaching is a well-known phenomenon. Here, high ocean temperatures cause a breakdown of the relationship between the coral and the symbiotic algae. You can see here from this diagram, in a healthy coral, the algae resides within the coral, and then due to these high temperatures, the algae is expelled from the coral, losing its colorfulness and then giving this white appearance, which actually is the skeleton of the coral that remains. And this can actually act as a substrate for the inhabitant of other organisms such as turf algae. If we look at a global scale, we have had 5 mass bleaching events, which have caused devastations to coral reefs all over the globe. And 2014 to 2017, the continuous bleaching events have been known as a record, which have actually caused 75% of the coral reefs over the globe to bleach. Not only climate, but chemicals such as nitrogen inputs can also have impacts on the corals. Anthropogenic inputs such as change of land use, population growth, discharges from sewage, industrial and other municipal effluents, terrestrial runoffs including those that are related to intensified agricultural practices, and then also coastal development can actually contribute to these inputs of nitrogen to the reefs and the coastal waters. Although nitrogen and its impact on corals are not much known of, most of the literature and then some possible impacts that have been identified as for now include reduced coral thermal tolerances, meaning its tolerances relating to changes in temperature, again increasing its risk of bleaching, meaning more of bleaching happening due to these temperature stresses. Also, the bleached coral, they can actually, due to its vulnerable state, compete with macroalgae, and then these can actually cause a permanent shift in the coral communities to a macroalgal dominance. The nutrient enrichment is also being known to increase prevalence of coral diseases. It has also known to increase biological erosion, whereby the calcium deposits have been known to be removed through this erosive process. And also, this is very much correlated with, again, the decreased calcification rates, the deposition of calcium carbonate, and also impacting the growth of corals. Nitrogen enrichment has also been known to impact coral reproduction and recruitment and the success of its larval, which depends on, as I said before, the poor nutrient level of the water and the clarity of the water as well. And this nutrient enrichment has also been known to infest crown of thorns starfish, although they are a part of the reef system. The explosive population of these crown of thorn fish can have a huge impact on the corals as they feed on these corals. And also, nutrient enrichment is well known for its algal blooms, which can also result in fish kills. This is relating to the increased water turbidity and then the result of decreased levels of dissolved oxygen of the water. Here, this slide shows how a healthy reef system and then that a stressed reef system can be identified relating to these indicated species. So, a good population of herbivorous fish, giant clams, seagrasses indicates that the reef is healthy, whereas large populations, although again sea urchins and crown of thorns form a part of the reef system as it is, large population of these organisms, sea urchins, crown of thorns, and macroalgae and filamentous algae actually indicates that the reef is not healthy and it is going through a phase of stress. To know more about nitrogen and its impact on the coral, and then to gather more scientific data on it, South Asian Nitrogen Hub has its work based on this work package 3.2, where the role of eutrophication in exacerbating coral bleaching and coral impacts is to be investigated, along with socio-economic research into nitrogen pollution on coral reefs. Also, work package 4.3, which has a role, which is looking into the role of urban and rural nitrogen sources for soil, water quality, and health. That's all from me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Aminath. Now we have completed 3 presentations. So now the presentations are open for question and answering. May I invite Ms. Kesha to moderate the question and answering? So,
thank you very much, Nissanka. Well, actually, we don't have any questions at the moment, so I suggest we just go on to the next section. Is that okay with you, Nissanka? Okay, I think it's a good idea. It's we are a little bit time behind the time, so then we will get into the second theme. Second theme is on the current policies and practices. Our first speaker for the theme is Professor Roger Jeffery, and he is a professorial fellow in sociology and associate director of the Institute of Edinburgh and South Asia, Special Night India at the University of Edinburgh. So his presentation topic is on the current status of nitrogen policies across South Asia. So now may I invite Professor Roger to make the presentation.
I'm very pleased to be here, and thank you, Professor Nissanka and Keesje, for helping to arrange these sessions. I'm talking today on behalf of a large group of people working in the South Asian Nitrogen Hub across particularly these institutions. I pick out in particular the contributions of Dr. Annie Yang as one of the members of this group who've helped put together research on the current status of nitrogen-related policies in South Asia. So just to give you a little background in the nature of the work we've been doing, we've took as our starting point a piece of research carried out by David Cantor and others from the International Nitrogen Institute, which supplied the first ever global overview of nitrogen-related policies. And this was a very substantial piece of research looking at database called the ECOLEX database, which is managed by 3 UN agencies, FAO included. And they applied to this huge database some very rigid filtering criteria, which I think was appropriate given the task they were faced with. They were attempting to understand the overall gaps and opportunities in the field of nitrogen-related policymaking globally. And using these rigid filtering criteria, they found some 2,700 national and regional policies, which worldwide, 56 of which were active in South Asia at the end of 2017. Starting from their path-breaking work, it's a very impressive piece of work, we decided that in a focus on policies in South Asia, we would take a slightly different approach. We took a more inclusive approach. So we used a much more flexible set of filtering criteria, and we used the FAOLEX database, which is the one created and managed by the FAO, which actually has a larger set of policy documents than does ECOLEX, for reasons which are somewhat unusual, but anyway. In addition to using the FAOLEX database, members of our team searched local sources as well, ministry databases, ministry websites, local knowledge that would allow them to identify additional policies. And we also picked up the 5 or so policies from South Asia that had not been covered in the global study because they came out in 2018 and 2019. And as you can see, if we compare the global figure with the regional figure, we were able to identify very many more policies that have relevance to the management of reactive nitrogen across South Asia. In general, these are only national policies. We haven't got any regional policies. We have some sub-national policies where provinces are active in policy making beyond what goes on at the national level. And as you can see, varying numbers across different countries in the region. 67% of these policies we decided were significant enough to be worthy of more intensive analysis because they had a wide scope. That's to say they covered large parts of the country or the whole country, or they covered a crop or an industrial activity that was widespread across the country and has high relevance, high or medium relevance, so that the policy statements suggested that they were likely to have impacts on the management of reactive nitrogen pollution. So this is the kind of criteria that we use to, these are the kinds of criteria we use to assess nitrogen policies. We looked at the gaps that they are likely to have. So policies that are siloed, they only deal with one sector or one sink, and they only deal with a single ministry, are likely to be less effective than those with a broader approach. They're driven by narrow objectives, perhaps attempting merely to control one feature of a particular sector. They very often have conflicting policy goals, the most obvious ones being where you want to increase agricultural production, but you don't think about the impacts this might have on lowering nitrogen use efficiency, or they may have limited scale or focus. And we were looking for opportunities for improving such policies by taking into account issues such as integration, coordination, cooperation, and the addressing of multiple sources and actors and scales. So what are our key results? And taking into account the aspects shown on the slide on the right, that we're dealing with sinks, variety of sinks, where does the reactive nitrogen go, what kinds of sectors produce reactive nitrogen pollution, agriculture, waste, transport, and so on, and the kinds of sources of nitrogen. How might policy affect these different kinds of issues? Do you focus on a sink? Do you focus on a sector? Do you take account of the different sources types? So not surprisingly, agriculture is the most common single sector oriented policy, but we have to take account of growing sources of nitrogen pollution, such as industrial and domestic waste. Policies, as we know, that might have one or more sinks are an advantage, even if the policy is focused on the sector. And framework policies, the most general policies, a nitrogen policy or an agricultural policy or an environmental policy, which is set out for the nation on a broad way, are the most common things we can find, but they don't do very much unless they're followed up by the use of core instruments, particularly regulations and or economic incentives to actually implement these policies. Can I just remind you that what we're talking about here are policies documents, policy statements. So we have at the moment only been able to identify policies that suggest that they will be able or might be able or might have been able to impact on the pollution caused by reactive nitrogen. What we need to do next is to investigate these policies in more detail. Are they actually having any impact? What are the main barriers to their impact? How is it that in some countries there are policies with such an impact, and can lessons be learned from these policies, either for a regional approach, which we hope would be coordinated through SASET, South Asia Cooperative on Environmental Policies, or through national civil society organizations or scientists promoting solutions that are not only scientifically appropriate, but also implementable. What we're hoping to find is what's often known these days as ways of smart regulation, not relying only on governments to require, to demand that people follow a particular policy, but encourage the involvement of civil society, of scientists, of industry groups, and so on, to take on these issues themselves. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor Roger, for the very interesting presentation and highlighting the status of the policies regarding the nitrogen related in the South Asian region. So now may I introduce the next speaker for this theme, Dr. Vera Eory. She is an environmental economist attached to the Scotland Rural University College, Edinburgh. Her presentation is on village scale issues for management of nitrogen and climate across South Asia. So now may I invite Dr. Vera to make the presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Nissanka. Thank you also, Keesje, for chairing this session, and for all of you audience, welcome, and thank you very much for listening to me this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are. I have to apologize because you will not be able to see me. My camera refused to collaborate with WebEx today. But I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk about how farm management has an influence on nitrogen and climate change, and how can society have an influence on farm management. The summary you are going to hear is based on the work carried out in the South Asian Nitrogen Hub in collaboration with numerous South Asian and UK partners, mostly in Work Package 1.3, but not exclusively, but across all work packages in the hub, almost all work packages. As we have heard from presenters today and yesterday, nitrogen pollution and greenhouse gas emissions are highly interlinked in the field of agriculture. An increasing share of nitrogen applied to crops and fed to animals does not end up in products like human food. In the past 50 years, global food availability has more than doubled, but the efficiency of utilizing the nitrogen had a downward trend in most countries. India, for example, on the left of this slide, saw a steady decline, while in Bangladesh, a sharp productivity increase at the end of the previous century improved nitrogen use efficiency considerably, but then the country fell back into a declining trend afterwards. South Asia is one of the agricultural nitrogen and greenhouse gas emission hotspots, as we've seen yesterday. But important differences exist between regions and farming systems, and indeed between individual farms, suggesting that there is scope for improvement across the region. Observations from the past 60 years show us that reducing nitrogen waste is not only essential, but actually achievable. In Nepal, the crop yield has increased since the 1960s, despite decreasing nitrogen application rates since the 1990s, resulting in an upward trend in nitrogen use efficiency. In Denmark, which is on the right-hand side of the slide, and in a few other European countries as well, the nitrogen pollution level has started to drop since the 1980s, when regulations on nitrogen and phosphorus use, particularly in relation to livestock manure, were introduced. These regulations have become more and more stringent, while new technologies and also the revitalizing of old practices allow farmers to achieve the same yield with using less resources. Achieving higher yield with less resources starts with considering best management for the growing circumstances. Careful planning ensures that no input is overused. For example, if there is a very dry period predicted and the farmer cannot have enough irrigation, or it's not available, then the suggestion is to use reduced fertilizer. Of course, to make that decision, the farmer needs to be able to expect these circumstances. Beyond such basic agronomic principles, certain practices and technologies can also help farmers to reduce the reactive nitrogen emissions from their crop and livestock production. We've heard about a few today earlier. I also like to mention the importance of growing legumes, which provide biologically fixed nitrogen to the entire rotation. Also the leaf color charts, which we have seen, which help adjusting the fertilizer rates. Briqueteuria, which reduces ammonia emissions as it can be placed deeper in the soil. Covering composting to keep more nutrients in the compost, and even biogas production, which provides cleaner cooking fuel and reduces methane emissions. Farmers, as all of us, take time to adopt new innovative practices. They need to learn about them. They have to see the benefits to their farm, and they have to find ways to pay for them. The two examples on this slide show the speed and extent how two new crop varieties were adopted in Indian villages. The blue lines represent information obtained via farmer surveys, while the other lines are simulated adoption. These cases also represent rare occasions where information on farming practices available at regular time intervals through observations. It is most commonly not the case, making policy planning and extension work and learning from past policies, successes and mistakes more difficult. Policy and the wider society, including consumers and the supply chain, have tools at hand to enhance the adoption of more sustainable farming practices. The price of fertilizer has an inevitable effect on the extent of their use. The two graphs on the left show how the ratio of applied nitrogen, phosphorus and potassium across India became more imbalanced after a big change in their price ratios in 1992. This suggests both that farmers often, mistakenly, consider different nutrients as alternatives to each other, but also that price is an important driver of fertilizer use. Other economic aspects play a role too in practice adoption. For example, the availability of capital. Those with larger farms or better access to credit can adopt practices easier. Furthermore, information availability through extension activities, the farmer's experience and education are also frequently associated with a higher uptake of sustainable practices. Overall, all this evidence shows that a step change in agriculture activities in the villages is feasible and will require policy development as well as the enhanced and locally tailored implementation of support structures for farmers. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Vera, for the very interesting presentation and also highlighting innovative practices that farmers adapted to like gain nitrogen and also to conserve the nitrogen or increase the nitrogen use efficiency. So thank you very much once again. Now, may I invite Dr. Warshi Dandeniya, the last speaker for this theme. He is going to talk on the how can an understanding of soil processes guide solution for nitrogen and climate. And Warshi Dandeniya is a colleague of mine, and she is a soil scientist and a senior lecturer of the Department of Soil Science, Faculty of Agriculture, University of Peradeniya. May I invite Dr. Warshi Dandeniya to make a presentation.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity given to present in this forum. I'm going to talk a bit about how can our understanding of soil processes guide solutions for nitrogen and climate. Next, please. Yes, in this slide, what I'm trying to indicate is the different forms of nitrogen present in soil. In soil, nitrogen present in the inorganic forms in simple ions like ammonium and nitrate, the forms which are taken up by the plant, and also it is present in the soil in organic forms as biomass nitrogen and simple and complex organic nitrogen forms, which is in a fertile soil contribute to about 90 to 98% of nitrogen in the soil. So if we consider about the nitrogen inputs to the soil, through biological nitrogen fixation, some amount of nitrogen is coming, especially in the form of inorganic nitrogen. So what I basically wanted to show you is that in soil, nitrogen is occurring in different forms like organic and inorganic forms. And organic nitrogen is the main component, which is, I mean, like from the total nitrogen, about 90 to 98% is present in the organic form in a fertile soil. So if we consider about the inorganic nitrogen, this ammonium is readily converted to nitrate by a process called nitrification, during which nitrous oxide gases are emitted to some extent. And once the nitrate is formed, it is readily converted to nitrogen gases like nitrous oxide, which is the gas we are so much concerned about with climate change, and also dinitrogen gas and nitric oxide if the conditions are anaerobic or when the oxygen levels are low. So if we want to intervene to reduce the nitrogen emissions to the atmosphere, as well as to reduce nitrogen losses from the soil system, we need to target two processes. One is the nitrification, the other one is the denitrification. So if you take nitrification process, in order to reduce the rate of nitrification, there are a few methods available. One is to reduce the rate of ammonium formation. So that people use slow release fertilizers, increase the split applications, and also there are techniques like application of biofertilizers, which will release the ammonium or produce ammonium in the soil system at a slower rate. So when we are using urea-like fertilizers, people add urease inhibitors, again help to reduce the rate of ammonium formation. But once the ammonium is formed, again there's another provision to reduce the nitrification rate, that is using nitrification inhibitors. So there are dicyanodiamide, commonly known as DCD, and nitropyrene, and some botanicals, especially in India, people use neem and karanjin oil, like different botanical formulations are available. These can be used to reduce the rate of nitrification. So these two methods are very much practiced, as they are directly involved with the biological processes. However, when it comes to denitrification, in order to reduce the denitrification rate, we have indirect methods. That is, either we have to reduce the formation of nitrate in the system, or we have to reduce the inducive factor in the soil that lead to denitrification. That means we can reduce the availability of labile carbon. In other words, these denitrifying organisms use a lot of, they are heterotrophic type organisms, so they need organic carbon sources for their survival. So we need to be mindful when we manage organic carbon in the system, and also about the irrigation water, because the denitrification happens under anaerobic conditions. So prolonged periods of inundation with water is not very suitable in an upland cropping system if you want to reduce the denitrification rate, for example. And the other thing is, if we control the nitrification and reduce the nitrate formation, then there is we can reduce the denitrification rate as well. All these are really challenging because in the nitrogen cycle, most of the transformations are biologically controlled, and there's a huge diversity of microorganisms involving in these processes. So that makes it really challenging, and we need to understand and go as a system-specific approach in nitrogen management when we are dealing with soil systems, because we cannot use blanket recommendations when it comes to soil. It has been estimated that about 60 to 70% of fertilizer nitrogen we apply is lost from the soil because of this nitrification-denitrification process. So it is really important we optimize the nitrogen fertilizer use efficiency at every cost. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Warshi. Even with the connection difficulties, you were able to manage the content of the talk. Okay, thank you very much. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the presentations are open for discussion. May I invite Ms. Kesha to moderate the question and answering section.
Thank you very much, Nissanka. It seems that everyone is very interested, but doesn't have any questions. There have been such fantastic presentations, very clear. But that's great, because we can save some time and move on to the next one.
So, but anyway, you can write question, and even later on we will try to answer. Okay, then in that case we will move to the next presentation. While once again thanking again for the excellent presentation, for all presenters who have made up to now. We are going towards the third theme, which is the options for solution of nitrogen issues. So in this theme, our first speaker is Professor Tapan Adhya. He is a professor attached to the School of Biotechnology, KIIT University. Okay, he is also the co-director of the science for the GCRF South Asian Asian Nitrogen Hub, and also the director for the South Asia of the International Nitrogen Initiatives. Professor Tapan will be talking on how can nitrogen management improve resilience to climate change. May I invite Professor Tapan to make his presentation now?
Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. So I thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to speak here. And also thanks to Sarath and Keesje for coordinating the whole session. Next one, please. Nitrogen, as has been already pointed out, is fundamental for life on Earth and also critical to sustain global food and bioenergy production. However, its inefficient use contributes to multiple pollution problems globally, like water quality, affecting water quality, air quality, greenhouse gases and climate, biodiversity, and stratospheric ozone. Next one. See, these are the 8 countries of the South Asia, which have the profile of which has been very aptly described by Ramesh. But one common thing is that I will be speaking mostly on the agricultural aspect. They are all agricultural based countries and having their economy, agricultural economy. And another common thing is that mostly these are cereal based ones, and cereal being one of the largest consumer of fertilizer nitrogen. Fertilizer nitrogen is mostly used to a large extent in all these countries. Next one. This shows the last one. I think it has been shown thanks to Roger for getting these graphs done. The nitrous oxide is, as has been pointed out in one of the first lectures by Dr. Pathak, that nitrous oxide is not that much important. I mean, only so being the nitrogen fertilizer. I am showing here the nitrogen fertilizer consumption in South Asia. The major portion is 70% plus of nitrous oxide emission is from India, and the other countries varies depending upon their fertilizer nitrogen use. India, incidentally, is the second largest nitrogen fertilizer user in the world. Next slide. Since fertilizer nitrogen is the major source of reactive N input, the researchers worldwide are tackling the problems of how to improve soil fertility and N management. And these include increased yields through improved crop varieties and management, increased end use efficiency by developing the different forms of fertilizer management, both organic and inorganic, and thereby reducing losses to the environment in the short and the long term. Next slide. So the following key areas are needed to be considered for reducing N waste, because on an average, around 20% of the nitrogen fertilizer applied ends up into the actual form, and the 80% is lost and is compartmentalized to the different compartments of the ecosystem. So the loss, how to reduce this loss? Now, if we go one by one, one is that improving the performance of N fertilizer. It has been very pointedly told that there are different ways to improve the performance of the fertilizer. First thing is to have a proper formulation, and that could be in a different forms, as has been pointed out by Dr. Himanshu Pathak, like the different formulations of nitrogen fertilizer, urea being then one of the most important contribution has been from India, where 100% of urea fertilizer is neem oil coated urea, and that is actually used as a nitrification inhibitor. Although some more knowledge you are gathering on this particular issue, but still this has been one of the important aspects of the nitrogen fertilizer. Then second thing is that actually here comes the 4R issues, that is the right time, right quantity, right time of application, right quantity, right formulation, and the right place of application. Some of the good thing has been like there, the Bangladesh, as has been pointed out earlier, is the deep, UDP, or the fertilizer applying at a lower depth. And also there are several. One of the commonest thing has been the use of the leaf color chart in India, which actually helps the lay farmer to check the fertilizer, the chlorophyll status, and correlate it with the fertilizer and apply the fertilizer. It has been found that with the proper management techniques of this type of technologies, innovative technologies, we can reduce, we can save fertilizer up to 40% depending upon the situation. Because the major thing is that if I take for the South Asia, inter-South Asian country, India and Pakistan, they mostly apply more fertilizer, while Nepal and Bhutan, they are mining the fertilizer, mining the soil for nitrogen, because there the amount of nitrogen fertilizer application is very less. So these are the two extreme sides, and this can really be balanced if we really perform this in fertilizer issue. Then improved management of biological nitrogen fixation. This is mostly probably one of the important thing which we have forgotten now is the proper crop rotation, or by using the green legume or leguminous plant in along with the cereals. Third thing is that improving performance of livestock production, a proper dietary formulation for the livestock and proper management, as well as the manure management from the livestock and the poultries, can save a lot of nitrogen leakage into the environment. Improved use and proper cycling of organic N resources. In continuation of that, there are several organic N resources which can be used. And then reduce food wastage and balanced meat and dairy consumption. This is a very interesting opportunity because we find that around 12% of the global total N is lost from the environment by the food wastage. And it almost equivalent to 2.7 teragram of nitrogen. And virtually it is around 6.3 teragram of nitrogen from the global balance. And then in the South Asia, also wastage is quite a lot. If you take it can extend, maximum range is 82 kilogram per capita of food wastage from Afghanistan, to 50 kilogram of per capita food wastage in India. So this whole thing, if we can tackle together, this can lead to a great amount of nitrogen saving or reduction of the wastage, as well as coupled with the proper food habit of balanced meat and dairy consumption. And the last is the measures to improve landscape resilience to N pollution. So these are actually overall the landscape system, if we can properly manage it. And then also there could be a proper use of trees and the different type of cropping patterns and the normal plant growth. If we can control, the nitrogen pollution can definitely be reduced, and the loss of nitrogen can be reduced to a great extent. So that's all I just wanted to mention here. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Tapan, for the very elaborative presentation on the possible ways of reducing the nitrogen waste. Okay, thank you very much. Now we will be going for the next presentation. Next presentation is by Professor Stefano Brandani. He is the chair professor of chemical engineering at the University of Edinburgh, and he is going to talk to us on engineering opportunities for recovery of nitrogen resources for climate and circular economy. So may I invite now Professor Stefano for the presentation.
Thank you. So basically, this component of the project is aimed at trying to recover the reactive nitrogen molecules from their concentrations, which are very low, and try to concentrate them and then make useful materials from it. And it's a direct collaboration across our hub, and in particular at KIIT, our colleagues are developing the materials for this challenging process. And here at the University of Edinburgh, in the School of Engineering, we are going to evaluate the materials and try to design viable processes to do this. So basically, the concept is to try to find some source materials to make the porous absorbents from waste, either industrial or agricultural waste, synthesize these highly porous and highly selective materials so that we can capture the reactive nitrogen molecules, and then design a process to do this, so that we can produce an enriched concentration of the original materials, which we can then use to make useful molecules and useful products. So this is in contrast with the current way in which we deal with reactive nitrogen emissions. And this is an example for the treatment of an exhaust gas, where basically what happens is that porous materials, similar to the ones that we intend to use, are concentrating only locally and only by a small factor the reactive nitrogen molecules on the surfaces of catalysts. And then these catalysts are used to convert the reactive nitrogen molecules to molecular nitrogen, i.e. Back to the molecule that then we have to use a lot of energy to convert back to useful products. So the concept is to start from what we understand of this project, or of this process, the one where it is catalytically converted, but it is a huge challenge if we don't want to convert it immediately to nitrogen, but to concentrate it. Because in order to do this, we have to take the waste gas streams that usually contain these molecules at parts per million and increase the concentration by a factor of normally at least 10,000. And that in itself is a huge engineering challenge. But the other important challenge is that this is a completely new process, because nobody's concentrating these molecules in this way. And therefore, we face the problem that we do not have the fundamental data that allows engineering tools to be used to arrive at useful predictions of the process performance. So the initial steps that have been undertaken are basically selecting, based on the literature on the catalytic conversion, possible materials, and in particular inorganic, highly porous adsorbents that are zeolites. And basically, to make a zeolite, you need silica and alumina. And therefore, the colleagues at KIIT are using 3 waste materials, in particular rice husk, fly ash, and red mud. And the rice husk is rich in silica, so then you have to add the alumina to make the zeolite, while the fly ash contains both the silica and the alumina. So it's more a question of adjusting the composition so that you get the correct material. And then, because we want to target the reactive nitrogen molecules, they intend to use also red mud, which has iron oxide that can be used in the zeolites. And they have started to synthesize the materials and have actually been able to achieve the formation of zeolite A from these starting materials. And the picture that you see at the bottom, basically the red dots are the positions of the cations inside the zeolite. And these cations are the ones that can be substituted to target directly the molecules of interest. And then the shape of the crystals, they're actually quite nice cubic crystals once they are synthesized. So once the materials are synthesized, then here in the University of Edinburgh, we do the testing of the materials, and we follow a procedure that we have established for carbon capture applications. And you can see that we start from really small sample sizes, 10 to 15 milligrams, and then we can scale up the process testing up to kilogram levels. But because we are starting with a project where we don't know much about the properties of ammonia, nitrous oxide, and oxides in general on these adsorbents, we need to use the smaller scale experiments where we can look at different materials relatively quickly, so that we can rank these materials for the processes and then determine the important information in terms of equilibrium and kinetics, so that we can design the processes and have an idea of eventually what are the likely costs of the technology. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Stefano, for very interesting presentation, and also the highlighting the attempts made by using advanced technologies to find engineering solutions to address nitrogen pollution related issues. Thank you very much once again. But even though you leave, so if there are questions, we will inform you and look for answers later on. So if you are not going to be here by that time. Thank you very much once again. Now may I invite the next speaker, Professor Mizanur Rahman. He is a faculty member of the Department of Soil Science, Faculty of Agriculture, Bangabandhu, Sheikh, Mujibur Rahman, Agriculture, University of Bangladesh. And he will be talking to us on the use of mobile technologies in nitrogen and climate management by citizens. So now may I invite Professor Rahman to make the presentation.
Thank you, Professor Nissanka. So good afternoon and good morning. I will be talking on use of mobile technologies for nitrogen and climate management by citizens. So nitrogen is an essential element for all life forms, and it is an element must for food production. Today we have world population about 7.86 billions, and which is expected to rise 9.8 billions by 2050. And by this time, we have to produce about 50% more food compared to the base year 2012. And for that, we need to apply a huge amount of inorganic fertilizers. And in 2018, the world applied about 190 million tons of fertilizers, where nitrogen comprises 58%. And from this figure, you can see that nitrogen application continuously increasing. So that's the world. If we consider in 1900 that at the beginning, without synthetic fertilizers, that we can get our required amount of food. But after 1950, we can see that the contribution of inorganic fertilizers is increasing linearly. And now and beyond 2015, the contribution of inorganic fertilizers for food production is almost 50%. So this indicates that if we don't have the inorganic nitrogen fertilizers, the half of the world population today would not survive. Because of production of more food using more fertilizers, that more fertilizers contributed to a higher loss, and a higher loss, that means from that loss, our soil, water, and air quality is degrading, destroying our ecosystems and biodiversity, increases greenhouse gas emission, mainly nitrous oxide emission, which is a stronger greenhouse gas and 300 times stronger than carbon dioxide. If we consider from 2000 to 2017, that we can see from agriculture, 16% greenhouse gas emission has been increased. And by this time, 40% enteric fermentation also has been increased. Nitrogen use efficiency is less. We know that around 20 to 30% is the nitrogen use efficiency. So which indicates that 70 to 80% of the applied nitrogen is lost. And these two figures depicted that a huge amount of applied fertilizers, nitrogen fertilizers, is going away from our environment. That is creating our environmental pollution, changing our climate. So where is the solution? Increasing nutrient efficiency, of course, is a solution, and there are a set of management activities. Urea displacement, neem-coated urea, speed application of fertilizers, and there are many other practices already approved as a very good technology. Urea displacement is a very sustainable technology in Bangladesh, but if we consider the farmer adoption, that is not much satisfactory. Neem coated urea is very good technology in India, and all these technologies can increase the nitrogen use efficiency. Very good technologies, but adoption is poor to medium. Many of the technologies, even though they are positive to increase the nitrogen use efficiency, but there is a question whether these technologies are capable to halve the nitrogen waste by 2030. Of course, they are reducing the nitrogen application and increasing the nitrogen use efficiency, but to have nitrogen waste by 2030, we need further efficient tools. So mobile technology might act as a vital tool for nitrogen management. Across the world and also in the South Asian countries, there are many nitrogen fertilizer apps available, and all apps are not user-friendly, even though they provide quantitative and guidance. Most of the apps are generalized. That is the one of the most drawback, that these apps are not using the farmers' field data like soil nutrients, yield gold, etc. Therefore, using these apps, we are getting the nutrient rates that will not be enough to reduce the nitrogen application or increase the nitrogen use efficiency as we expect. Therefore, location-specific, efficient, and solidly and guidance tools are still demanding. Strength of launching mobile-based N application, smartphones and internet connection. These are the two vital tools for adopting mobile-based nitrogen apps. And in this table, you can see that in China, UK, and USA, the smartphone users, a lot of people are using smartphone, but in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, compared to the total population, the smartphone user is less, but there is a possibility to increase this because these are increasing day by day. And in this figure, we can see that from 2016 to 2021, that smartphone user across the globe increased linearly from 2.5 to 3.8 billions. And there are another tools that high-speed internet connection. In the South Asian countries, we can see that from 2015 to 2025, that in around 2019, that internet 4G connection not satisfactory in many countries, especially in India it is 56%, but in other countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Sri Lanka, less than 25%. But it is expected that 4G connection compared to the total mobile connection will be increasing in future, and that is depicted that area coverage by 4G network. There is a wider area coverage, so still possibility exists to get more connection of 4G connection in the mobiles. So activities under INMS and SANEs. Identify best nitrogen management practices, and we are listing short and long list of best management practices. Identify the fertilizer management apps, characterize them based on some common criteria. Database generation, survey under work package 1.3, 2.2, and nitrogen management trials under 2.1a across nitrogen hub partners, and survey data from Coal Farm Alliance and Nourish Scotland, soil and plant analysis data, and capturing crop image by smartphone at different growth stages under variable N rates. Linking leaf color chart technology to mobile phone, data compilation by BSMRU, University of Edinburgh, and Coal Farm Alliance, mobile-based app development by Coal Farm Alliance, calibration and validation of apps, release of farmers' use. And all these activities are going slow because of COVID-19 pandemic situation. The activities what we are conducting under INMS SN is that will be directed to sustainable nitrogen management that will ensure soil carbon sequestration, ensure that protects soil biodiversity, maintain soil fertility, and ultimately will contribute to increase nitrogen use efficiency, reduce greenhouse gases emission, mitigate climate change effect. And by this way, we are moving forward to have nitrogen OS by 2030, and we hope that we can ensure our green earth. So thank you all.
Okay, thank you, Professor Rahman, for the interesting presentation. Again, highlighting the farming community's attitudes towards going for like smartphones and things like that. I think it is a need in the future. So now may I invite the next presenter, Professor Avis. He will be talking to us on the importance of management of nutrient-rich effluent, especially the wastewater for climate and nitrogen benefits. So Professor Alvis is a senior professor attached to the Department of Chemical and Process Engineering of the Faculty of Engineering, University of Moratuwa, and also he is the graduate dean of the graduate faculty of the University of Moratuwa. As also he is the project director of the coordinating secretariat for science, technology and innovation, which is called KIIT in Sri Lanka. May I invite Professor Ajis to make the presentation.
Thank you very much, Professor Nissanka. It's a pleasure to have this brief few minutes on discussing on a very important topic. Just going back, I thought I'll just put from a chemical engineering point, it's nice to see the reactor that's first there in front of the BASF headquarters, where the man first cracked the issue of taking the non-reactive nitrogen to reactive nitrogen, and thereby, as you can see, the population kind of kept rocketing up, and that's thanks to the availability of fertilizer and then the food. And of course, today we see the situation of Rockstrom's Stockholm Institute. They have come up with the biogeochemical flows, and we see both nitrogen and phosphorus. We are exceeding the planetary boundaries, which actually push us to think. And I suppose that's what we are discussing today. How do you tackle this issue? Because while we are having all the benefits, we now need to be accountable for the benefits that we are realizing through in a proper way, in a responsible manner. So going to the situation of, just want to remind this aspect of, we seems to be revisiting some of the old ideas in a way. Look at Colombo Declaration of 1973, and of course we are discussing the Colombo Declaration in 2019. So going back to 1973, if you remember, all of us, this was the year that the world was awakened up to the energy crisis. And remember, looking at anaerobic digestion, the biogas as we are popularly known, we did have the issue of cow dung, cakes and so on being burnt to realize energy and heat. And in that process, the nitrogen was getting lost. The issue there was, of course, we are getting energy in some way, but we were getting problems of losing nutrients to soil. And on one hand, the energy problem was getting kind of like addressed to some extent. Well, we will be running into an agriculture issue. So there was this interest in anaerobic digestion, and at the time, and in 1973, there was this Colombo Declaration of pushing anaerobic digestion as a solution to this energy crisis. And of course, the situation with anaerobic digestion is it has its benefits of taking a waste as a raw material, and then of course giving out energy in one form, and the residual material is soil conditioner and fertilizer. And I suppose that's where we are at in 2019. Now we see this option of, we have also moved into the circular economy principle. We have changed, we have now understood the issue of carbon and the climate issue, but then we hear the term from Rockstrom, the nitrogen is least known yet most critical. So it's, of course, it's not the, it's a reactive nitrogen that we're talking about, but man has devised multiple ways of turning around this, getting these reactive species. So going back into the wastewater management, we find much of these wastewater streams, and of course we have solids, and then they also in turn turn out wastewater streams like in leachate from the waste material collections. We have the processes of becoming reactive nitrogen. And then we have the process of all the stuff that we eat, the food that we waste, we were talking about, we lose quite a significant amount of the foods that we produce. Not only that, the fertilizer that we put in, we lose quite a lot, just runoff, and then we have to address. So in the interim, we actually had ideas of, okay, need to control these environmental impacts, and we were talking about eutrophication aspect. So there's a need to control. So the wastewater management at some point, or up to now, we were really looking at maybe the carbon management. So BOD, COD is high on the agenda, and the technologies were aligned with the BOD, COD management. And the tertiary treatment, if at all we have been doing, then we were talking about or thinking about the eutrophication aspect. So there was this interest in the removal of nitrogen, and we didn't mind reactive nitrogen species becoming nitrogen gas and joining the atmosphere. Fine, from the point of view of nitrogen not in a place where it's going to cause us a problem, was addressed through the technology. So we find still most of the time this is where we are in terms of environmental management. Though now today we are now bringing this matter of nitrogen management, and not just nitrogen management, but thinking like ammonia nitrogen, which is in the wastewater, is not a resource. It should be a resource, and we should be connecting that to the circular economy mindset, because earlier mindset was let's get this environmental management from a pollution perspective out, but not so from the resource collection point, resource capture. So that nitrogen was not considered as much of a resource, but a more of a nuisance value. And our technologies were defined that way. Our technology KPIs in terms of environmental management KPIs that we are given, we were fixed with those mindsets. So what I'm saying is the same anaerobic digestion now can come into the technologies we have to design to or come up with resource recovery process in mind, and that needs some changes. Yes, the technologies are becoming available, the technologies are developing. I mean, the same anaerobic digestion systems now can be looked at as a resource recovery principle as well. Of course, then you have to look at, we consider anaerobic digestion as a triple benefit technology. That is just, you process waste, so you manage waste and you generate energy, and then you generate a fertilizer soil conditioner in turn. And this soil conditioner fertilizer aspect is what we're talking about. And in that, you can see some technology has to be fixed, some additional downstream processing may have to be brought in to manage the digestate that comes out of the anaerobic digester, and maybe different or additional technologies like Anomax systems, where we are talking about anaerobic ammonia oxidation. In fact, I'm showing Mythica 2020 is something that we are doing with in Sri Lanka. We have lots of solid waste dumps, and we have a significant amount of leachate. And to manage the leachate, ammonia, and so on, we are looking at this Anomax reactor plus the wetlands. And of course, today from Colombo, when we are talking, we are speaking from the wetland capital. It's a whole of Colombo. We check it as a Ramsar, wetland capital in the world, one of the only capital in the world so far. And of course, the technologies are there now. Instead of this simple nitrification, denitrification steps where we were only addressing eutrophication aspect, we now moved into situations like this, even electrochemical, the chemical precipitation, like this true white precipitation. And why not use autotrophic organisms like even microalgae? And I'm putting Dr. Tilani an example that we have linked up into our biotechnology innovation park. We are going to put in this type of wastewater treatment system where the microalgae will be harnessed back in. So the resource recovery is factored into the process rather than treat and discharge with only an environmental management aspect in mind. Just imagine the benefits that we have. I mean, microalgae is a very good autotrophic mechanism. I mean, there's plants. Just take spirulina, for example, and spirulina can be a food item. We know it's a wonderful food item as well. So in coming with like Anomax, where we are talking about bacterial species, where they will be reacting with the nitrites and ammonia to produce nitrogen, or going forward, looking at ammonia capture systems, right? Ammonia fixation And that's where we said about thinking this ammonia and nitrogen in the wastewaters to be captured maybe by clay, and we're talking about zeolites in the gas phase in the earlier presentation. So the technologies needs to be resolved, even though the technologies are available today or becoming available today. The option of them using in the large scale is not that prevalent. I mean, we know that because our guidance systems are not yet there. So if you're talking about this amount of reduction in time to come, we must move technology into policy and policy into action. And that's important. The technology developments are taking place. Again, from a Sri Lankan point, and say, when you talk about industries, we are talking about point source pollution, and technologies can be fixed right away. But when you talk about agriculture and livestock, they are actually non-point source pollution, and it's not easy to fix. So an example, like we know we bring a lot of fertilizer to the country, and even if you take our river bodies, the nitrogen fluxes, we see that even compared to India, we just heard that India is world's number 2 in usage. Yet, if you see some of the data from rivers, the nitrogen fluxes, Sri Lanka actually gives the load per unit discharge. The Sri Lankan rivers show a higher value. It means that we are applying what we are applying at a higher rate. That is more so than what is recommended. And what just happens is the plants don't uptake them. We just tend to lose them as runoff and result in significant environmental discharge. So it's a loss of money as well. And today we have to think, and there what you see in the read in Sinhala is about nano fertilizer. It was mentioned nano fertilizer as an option in an earlier presentation. So we have this nano fertilizer being developed, and it's a sale of this intellectual property to India that it's mentioned in this Sinhala just extract that I have put in here for the benefit of the others. So we have the nano fertilizer, which we were looking at 40 to 50% reduction in the urea application. And that is the way forward for this non-point source pollution, because we cannot put an end of pipe application of a technology. We must have prevention technology or optimization technology in addressing that, and thereby actually having different ways of realizing what we want, but we need to do it in different format. So that's an example. But again, from a Sri Lankan point, remember we are losing a significant amount of nitrogen from sewage and so on. We just discharge to the outside. Unfortunately, that's the truth. So we do have the problems in the beaches, microbial contamination, and it's a wonderful raw material to be, not to be lost like that. And it's important that I just put an example of the Pubas in United Kingdom, where the wastewater treatment, sewage treatment plant gets digested and so on, and the gas, and then runs a transport system a bit. And we can see this example of transport system in many other countries in European Union and so on. So the opportunities are there for the recovery of this, and then the energy, and then so on, prevent the NOxes from the fossils can be countered by this type of operation. So it's
finish up now.
Outstanding. Right. So finally, having nitrogen losses by 50%, I would say we need policy-specific guides coming out to drive decision-making. For example, like from Ministry of Environment in Sri Lanka, we should get it to the center, like what the OSTP, Office of Science, Technology and Policy in UK, and the example of EU I have given. It has to be done. And we have to have data-driven decision-making, that exactly what we need to be doing, amount of sewage, amount of transport fuel possible, and exactly what to be done with the technology. And change of guidelines and project terms of references by Central Environment Authority. You can cut across to other countries, where when you give guidelines, we don't take eutrophication as an example. We take resource recovery as a guideline and give guidelines TOR based on that. And eco-innovation to find its due place for like Board of Investment when you drive FDI to come to the country where you have to bring in new technology and the technologies to be implemented so we can actually realize this 50%. And circular economy as an economic policy has to be done, which is national policy, national planning department. So once you get that type of mechanisms in place, it's possible to look at losses by 50% by 2030 should not be a problem.
Thank you.
The technology is there. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. We are entering into the question and answering section. Professor Keesje, Dr. Ms. Keesje, are there?
So yes, Nissanka, we have had some questions, but luckily people are answering them in the chat, and we're running really late. So
then shall we proceed with the other session then?
Yes, please. Thanks, Nissanka.
So then we are getting into the final theme of the invited speakers session. So then final session is on the raising awareness among policymakers, NGOs, and businesses. So now may I invite the first speaker, Alec Taylor. He is the head of the program for climate and land use of the Worldwide Fund for Nature. So his presentation will be on raising awareness on nitrogen, climate and environmental sustainability. May I invite Dr. Taylor?
Yes, hello everybody. Thank you very much, Nissanka, and thank you to the organisers for the invitation to speak at this very important event. This year, as part of the COP26 climate negotiations in particular, we have a critical moment, I think, to help define the frameworks needed to urgently reduce levels of excess nitrogen use and waste globally, which, as we know, are not currently compatible with limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees. I was asked to speak today briefly about raising awareness on nitrogen, climate and environmental sustainability. It made me wonder what proportion of the general public know, for example, that nitrous oxide is actually a much more powerful greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide, or that nitrogen emissions are a dominant contribution of food and farming systems to climate change. And I suspect at the moment it's pretty low. And I'm not sure that many people in my own office of WWF UK probably know this either. Yet, as we've already heard today, nitrogen as an issue links many different impacts felt directly by people across the world, from air and water quality to deforestation, from ocean health to nature loss, in addition to the impacts of emissions and the impacts in tackling climate change. To turn this around, however, in terms of increasing awareness, these are also various entry points, narratives, stories, and frames to tell the story of nitrogen, not just in terms of damage to people's lungs, to rivers, or to biodiversity, but also, I think, importantly, as opportunities, being able to clearly show that reducing excess nitrogen and better using the nitrogen that we do need has a multitude of different benefits to society. For example, as cost savings to farmers from using fertilizer. I think also that this is also an opportunity to really explain the connections and the climate impacts more generally of our global food system in particular, from the animal feed that we produce and transport to the fertilizers that we use for growing crops. And just as we are one system and one planet, so nitrogen, I think, is a single issue that links us all. And I think that's quite an important frame that we can all promote to our policymakers. And although excess nitrogen use has global impacts, the story of reducing nitrogen inputs can start right where people are in their own landscapes. So on the land that people farm, in the cities that people congregate in, or in the diets that people eat, for example. Transforming agricultural systems in particular, to stay within the limits of the Paris Agreement on climate change, inherently will need transformational change. Positive change, but change nonetheless. And I think we also need to recognise that. Now, as a heavy user and importer of nitrogen, the UK has a clear leadership role, from my perspective, living and working in the UK, in helping to shift our food and farming systems away from a high nitrogen, high input paradigm in favour of more nature positive and regenerative methods. But yet too often, I think, the impacts of using too much nitrogen are handled separately by policymakers when it comes to regulating air, water, climate, nature, food and health. And I worry actually that without a comprehensive and integrated approach to both drastically reducing inputs and also better using nitrogen that we do need, that we will actually lose these widespread economic, societal and environmental benefits. Once people recognise that nitrogen overuse lies at the heart of many of the issues that policymakers are trying to resolve, then I think we just widen the community of those policymakers, politicians, and also the general public. And we build a community, a much bigger community, that have a shared interest in taking action. I very much hope that the story of nitrogen and its importance in tackling the climate crisis can be given a spotlight through this process and through the Nitrogen for Net Zero initiative. And I also would call on countries to include nitrogen reduction measures in their own enhanced nationally determined contributions in advance of the critical COP26 summit in Glasgow here in the UK. So I will leave it at that. Let's not take N2O for an answer when it comes to tackling our climate and nature emergencies. And I thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Taylor, for the interesting presentation. Now we will be moving to the last presenter of the invited speaker sessions, Dr. Sarath Ranavira. He is the chairman of the Biofood Private Limited and former president of the Lanka Organic Agriculture Movement. So he is going to talk to us on the experiences from South Asian countries relying on non-organic nitrogen sources, farmer community perceptions. May I invite Dr. Sarath to make the presentation now?
Thank you, Prof. Nissanka, and invite organizers who invited me. Ayubowan, that's how we greet in Sri Lanka. So I have a very different topic today. Actually, it's relying on inorganic, non-inorganic nitrogen sources and farmer community perception. So this is one of the, I think, different topic you have given to me. Pretty much challenging, and I think I have a very different approach to this topic. Martha, you can go to the next slide, please. And being a food scientist, I've been starting this organic project in Sri Lanka with a large number of small farmers, and found it's not working properly in the first 10 years, and couldn't understand why not the farmers have a better income, though income, but yielding. And then being a food guy, I understood that it is not the input they put, the way they put it is one of the biggest challenges. So I go back to my basic knowledge in the nutrition and how the absorption takes place. In human body, I think we absorb differently, and the same way the plants react. So we have a very good connection to the plant and our absorption. And I think some of the speakers, I think Prof. Tapan from Bangladesh, yeah, probably, and speak about the waste of food when we harvest and when we take it to our plate. I think more than 50% is wasted, believe me. So we are talking about food security in the future and planning on so much, but we have not managed food properly. Same time, when we eat it, we think that we can absorb all. So the keyword is not the nutrient for me, but the absorption. So can you go to the next slide? So in human beings, so it's absorbed in the microvilli in small intestine, and whatever you take is not absorbed. If you take about 100 gram of meat, you might absorb only 53 grams of the maximum nutrients. So the balance is waste. So you do wasting before you take it to plates, huge volumes, and later on also you do the same, unfortunately. Luckily, we humans have a better control other than this, like Professor Ajit mentioned, that we do the recycling. Otherwise, the waste from humans are not managed properly. We have a huge problem in the world. We will not live in the world. So luckily it is managed. But when we go back to the plants, are we doing the same? I think the Dr. Warshi mentioned about the blanket recommendation and very generic recommendation of the application. This is one of the key words I like to listen to during the presentation. Martha, you can go to the next slide. So the plant take the nutrients in different way actually. So like we human beings need the enzyme, digestive enzyme to digest and absorb food. And same way, the plants also need the nutrients. And what are the nutrients for the plant to absorb? Whatever you put to the plants cannot be absorbed. So you have to maintain the nutrients. So the microbes, very required microbes are the keyword. And I think we put excessive nitrogen, excessive inputs to the plants without knowing the specific requirement of individual group of plants. So here I put in the slide. You can go to the next, please. Yeah, so nitrogen fixing bacteria, rather we put a lot of nitrogen. We put the nitrogen fixing bacteria, like very importantly root associate Azospilium and the free living Acetobacter, and then symbiotic root nodule forming fixed rhizobiums. So these are kind of well given by the nature, and we really ignore this because it is given free. I mean, we don't appreciate it. And mycorrhizal fungus for nutrient transport. So they do all the beautiful work without charging you all. So we don't care about it when no one charges. So what we have to do really, if we manage giving the basic living condition for these microbes, so beautiful microbes, in order plants to absorb the required amounts, I think our job is mostly done. Rather, we put a lot of inorganic ones, ending with the forcing nutrient intake and really, avoiding the resistance that really help to develop the immunity of the plant. And then when we consume it, we will build up our immunity. So now the whole world is facing serious pandemic problem because we have no immunity, because immunity is taken out by forcing unnecessary things to the plants. So there's a nice presentation by Professor J.D. Potter, I think British pharmaceutical professor, who has mentioned what are the chemicals really supporting the immunity and what is missing with the forcing the nutrient to the plants. So there are beautiful compounds called silvestrol and resveratrol. So these are the immunity supporting compounds that prevent the human being from the cancer. But these all are really taken out of the whole system. So from one side, we talk about excess nitrogen, not controlling properly, and then waste. How do we control waste? Waste is controlled in human condition differently, luckily, but how do we control the waste of this? Next slide, please. If you don't manage without putting additional nitrogen or additional soil inputs with heavy nitrogens, you will have all the problem. Like we all know that as scientists, we end up with blue baby syndrome and so many lineup problems. Some are not known yet. Some will be known maybe 10 years later. So accumulation of all the chemicals in the human cells in different places will cause all the problems. But instead of even giving the natural carbon inputs, we give the microbes, nature, local microbes found in the local condition. Like if it is Bangladesh, it has to be found in Bangladesh. If it is India, it has to be found in India. So we should not exchange because these are formed more than 1,000 years. So these are so beautiful nature given gift that is not really appreciated. And then if we really see some deficiencies, you can really apply the microbes directly to the trees, or apply the leaf concentrate that is fermented basically 2 weeks to leaf foliage. So these are the beautiful system we started doing after 10 years of poor experience in organic farming. Right now, I think we have about 30,000 farm families enjoying the benefit of this application without having any artificial inputs to the soil and plant. And Martha, next slide, please. Yeah, so you can see some slides how people spray biofertilizer on leaf, as well as apply the solid fertilizer to the roots of tea. And same way we have different perennials, coconuts, spices, and paddy, and there are vegetables. So these are pretty much different inputs where we don't put every time fertilizer, but we give one-time fertilizer, and the balance is given by leaf concentrate plus microbe dose, naturally found or locally found. So this is a kind of a key alternative technique that we have been practicing last almost 15 years with beautiful success story. Actually, I'm not going to end the story like this. I'm not going to end the story with organic farmers. Next slide, please. Beauty of this is, the most of this kind of microbe fertilizer, organic fertilizer is used by inorganic farmers, conventional farmers. These farmers are conventional farmers who have been using all heavy nitrate inputs. Now they have been converted to using this, and they never sell their products as even organic. They do it purely because of the yield. I think when you have the nice story with the yield developing, I think people would really think of not using heavy artificial inputs. So this is, I think, our story today, and I think it's not really easy if we don't join hands with the education. I think if we now the farmers had farmers known about the impact to the environment, they would have been really enjoying their agriculture, even without knowing that they really do this because of the higher yielding, high income. I think it's our duty, if we join hands, if you educate these people of what the impact out of their beautiful agriculture using microbes, they will be thrilled. So I'm ending this my session with these inputs, and it's a kind of a different approach, looking at how human absorb all these nutrients. And thank you very much for inviting me to this session.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Sarath Ranavira. So now had an interesting presentation. So we are running out of time. So therefore, like if you have any question, please write, and we will be answering and sending answers to you. So with this, actually, I want to thank all invited speakers for making interesting presentation, and invite Ms. Kesha to start the panel discussion. I mean, sorry for the delay, but I mean, we will proceed.
It's all good, Nissanka. It's all good. Right, well, let's get started with this panel discussion. Thank you very much to the panelists. As we're running short on time, what I've decided is I'm going to put you on the spot, and rather than you have 2 questions to answer, we'll just have 1, and you'll have to see which one I choose for you. Please keep it just to 1 or maximum of 2 minutes. Actually, 1 minute would be even great. And I'm going to use my phone. I'm not as polite as Nissanka, okay? Right, so first of all, Raghuram, wonderful to have you here. Raghuram is the chair of the International Nitrogen Initiative, president of the Sustainable India Trust and Society for Conservation of Nature, and a professor of biotechnology in GGSIP University of New Delhi. So Raghuram, I wondered, what actions do you think we should prioritize in terms of reaching net zero with the help of nitrogen?
Thank you, Keesje, for this opportunity. Ayubowan to my Sri Lankan colleagues, and good morning, good afternoon to all the other South Asian colleagues. Well, I speak primarily from the perspective of the scientists, and as scientists, we have the luxury of sometimes talking of the possibilities in an idealized fantasy world, unlike social scientists who have to root everything they say in a real world scenario. My social scientist friends and climate justice activists tell me that net zero is directly pitted against climate justice, but I would not go into that. What is important for me as a scientist is to locate any discussion on net zero within the already agreed Rio principles of common but differentiated responsibility, considering not just current emissions but cumulative emissions, which means we do not make net zero into an equal job of unequals, but there is a proportionate responsibility to all the countries in accordance with their contribution to the total nitrogen load. So if we locate the whole notion of net zero within this perspective, because I also represent the civil society, not just science, and this particularly has been historically the position of many countries in South Asia, especially India. But within that, there exists tremendous possibility for moving as close to net zero as we possibly can within the available options that science and technology can provide. And I'll flag a couple of things that can be done. First is to control NOx, we need to control coal and diesel. Berlin has controlled NOx particulate matter pollution only by controlling diesel. It worked beautifully. We can also do that. For ammonia, we need to improve manure management and waste management. For nitrous oxide, we have to improve legume-based rotations, revisit them as much as possible to cut down the requirement for inorganic fertilizer.
Thank you, Raghuram. That's fantastic. So that leads really well onto Ananda Malawan country, the country representative for IUCN in Sri Lanka. You are obviously talking about more biodiversity as well as the sources. So I wondered if you could talk about what you think the important co-benefits are of taking action on nitrogen.
Keesje, and greetings from Sri Lanka. Basically, I think we heard the different ends, how the ecosystem being impacted by nitrogen, and it was also got connected with the other pollutants in a very nice way. And especially when we are in development, we like to see this multi-stakeholder, multi-sector connection, because you cannot take biodiversity independently. It is linked to, as Dr. Anil said, income and disaster risk reduction and the nature-based solution. And also the economics. We have a lot of economics coming in the back end, in the poverty alleviation, the quality of life, sustainable consumption and production. So we are in a plethora of subjects with different stakeholders. So the challenge we are facing now is how to put this together. So what I see as two good entry points is, one is the awareness education. As Warshi said, the process is, how do you quantify? How do you take the policy level to the middle manager level and to the grassroots level? How do you describe things in a way that different levels can understand and change policies and put systems in place at the middle management levels, and also get the communities to understand the difference between aerobic and anaerobic and denitrification and nitric oxide emissions. And then comes back the monitoring. If you don't know what you can't measure, you don't know how to manage it. So that brings us the fluxes. I think Professor Ajit mentioned about the fluxes. What's the amount of nitrogen, the loading out of you apply or out of the ones you are emitting from the industry, the fluxes. Then you come into the collective agreements. Now, one classic example is the Chesapeake Bay. Now everybody came together from the energy side, the agriculture side, the power generation side, tourism side, disaster management side, and they agreed on quantified targets to reduce in a time frame. So I think we are in a very good situation. I think we need to work together, and having nitrogen as a central subject can bring many more players into the dialogue. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ananda. So our next panelist is Tariq Aziz, who's the Assistant Professor at the Institute of Soil and Environmental Sciences at the University of Faisalabad. And Mr. Aziz, I was wondering, Ananda had suggested that monitoring is one of the ways that should be a priority action. Is that something you'd agree with, or do you have other actions you prioritize?
Thank you all the organizers for providing me the opportunity. As sustainable nitrogen management links with I think, all of the SDGs like 1, 2, 3, 6, 8. However, when you see the SDG indicators, nitrogen is relevant almost everywhere, but barely visible anywhere. So it is invisible, but everywhere. And mostly crop production and livestock sector are the two major emission sectors. I think if you consider greenhouse gas emissions globally, as well as for most of the South Asian countries. And the policies which are very much relevant to nitrogen management and different initiatives are fragmented. Hence, a combine and join up approach towards integrated nitrogen management is the best approach. And for any solution, there must be a better assessment. So for developing countries like many South Asian countries, we do not have very much better nitrogen assessment, as different nitrogen sources, different sinks. One sink is beneficial and other sink is, you can say, very much problematic for the environment. So as an action plan, I think establishment of national roadmaps for sustainable nitrogen management with the ambition to halve nitrogen waste is, I think, one of the most important action plan which should be taken up to reduce nitrogen emissions and towards net zero, I think.
Wonderful, thank you very much. And I would suggest it's not just developing nations, it's also developed nations. We have exactly the same problem here in Scotland, where we need a proper action plan. So Gareth Morgan, who's the head of policy, farming and land use at the Soil Association, you suggested in the questions about having a different approach rather than nitrogen use efficiency. Do you think that is one of the actions that should be prioritized, this move to more agroecological methods of farming?
Yes, I found the presentations fascinating today, and I think future generations will be amazed at the way we use nitrogen in the 20th and 21st century. The assumption being that we pump enough nitrogen into our farming systems that enough of it gets into our crops and food, and we haven't really thought about where the rest of that nitrogen ends up, the impact on the climate, the impact on biodiversity, the impact on human health. And we've encouraged a mindset that if you put enough nitrogen in, you get enough benefit, and we're not worrying about all those side effects. I think the only solution is a fundamental change in the way we view nitrogen inputs and move to a model of nitrogen in farming that's much more circular and much less reliant on artificial reactive nitrogen inputs. So a shift to agroecological and organic farming systems, I think, probably is the only way forward at this point, as well as looking at improving the efficiency of the nitrogen that we're putting in.
Thank you. We move on to Ankur Quest, who's the Vice President of the Climate Neutral Roadmap and Business Support at ICAR-National. So we've heard quite a lot about how to use nitrogen in terms of nitrogen use efficiency, but I wondered if you wanted to talk a bit about the co-benefits of taking action, even in terms of the production of nitrogen at source.
Yeah, first I would like to highlight that we have talked a lot about the use of fertilizer, but we have not talked a lot about the development of green fertilizer. I think this is very important to mention here, because it's first of all, we have to choose the right fertilizer from the start, and the fertilizer itself is also coming already with a carbon load. So it's important that the farmer is asking for abated nitrogen, because by this you can even halve the carbon footprint of the fertilizer overall. So it makes a lot of sense to go for abated nitrogen. And secondly, there is a lot in the pipeline. For example, Yara is currently developing green nitrogen, which is produced based on a natural, on bioenergy, on renewable energy. Now we are producing the fertilizer based on natural gas, so it comes already with a carbon load from the gas. But in future, we will produce it based on solar power, water power, or based on wind energy. And then we will have no carbon anymore in the production process. So we have to acknowledge that nitrate is the only end source in future which can become really carbon free. And also, if you use it properly, it is resulting in the lowest emission also for N2O and ammonia. So that has to be also considered when we talk about the crop nutrition overall. And once we are moving to a more regenerative agriculture, and that is absolutely supported, the co-benefits will be that we are opening up new business opportunities in the green economy. So we will have growing markets for green and circular fertilizer. It hasn't been mentioned before. We can upscale basically and upgrade organic waste materials in the stream and bring it back to the place where it was coming from the production of crops. And we will also develop new consumer segments with deforestation-free, regenerative and sustainable food production. And I hope one day the consumer will also make more conscious decisions and will be willing also to pay the true cost of food. So we have also to educate the consumer that they have a very big responsibility also. And then generating the carbon credit market is also a very important part to bring some incentives for the farmer, because the incentives for the farmer is the bottleneck I see at this moment. We have a lot of technology available, but the farmer is not basically enabled and is not incentivized for that. So that the framework for the incentivization of the farmer, that has to be put in place, and then the enablement has to come at the same moment. Digital services will be a very critical part here. It has been mentioned already several times. We are close to the tipping point that we will reach millions of hectares and farmers with better solutions, and that will drive knowledge transfer and a real improvement in the efficiency of the use of fertilizer, using the organic products and organic waste materials which are in place, and just giving what is missing to the demand of the crop with mineral fertilizers. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think what is really clear to me is how nitrogen can have a really integrated approach, and actually that is what INMS and SENIT are trying to do. And this can be an example for tackling climate change in general. So often within the UNFCCC's reporting mechanisms, it's all very siloed, but actually to tackle nitrogen and to tackle climate change, we need complex solutions. I just want to say a very thank you first, and also an apology to all of the panel members for making your presentation so short, and thank you very much for your patience. Bohama Stuti and Ayobaram to our Sri Lankan hosts. It was wonderful being a co-host with you, Nissanka. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Keisha. So once again, I mean, I endorsing what you have mentioned about today's program and also the knowledge shared with all the participants. So I mean, it was a great opportunity. I also want to thank all the invited speakers, panelists, and the participants for their very informative presentation and sharing their, I mean, thoughts, and also participating, listening to the presentation. So while thanking once again, so may I invite now Professor Mark Sutton to make the closing remark and also to conclude today's event.
Thank you very much, Nissanka, and thank you, Keisha. Thank you, everybody, for your speeches today, your comments, discussion, and everybody listening in. It seems to me really clear that we're still in this COVID challenge. We entitled this meeting about nitrogen for climate and green recovery. And well, I think we're still a long way away from green recovery. We're still right in the thick of it. And we know in particular that in India, we face a major challenge, and our thoughts are with our colleagues and friends there. What COVID does at least do is it's given speeding up to use these electronic systems. They're helping us. And of course, that means we'll also have a record of this meeting, and that record can go on the web so that others who are not able to join today will be able to hear your speeches, your interventions. On the Halve Nitrogen Waste Challenge and reaching net zero, these are both ambitious goals. We know that, but we've seen some great ideas today, and in particular, the discussion about how to move forward with national action plans in the run-up to COP26. I'm speaking to you with many hats, but one of those hats is from the GCRF South Asia Nitrogen Hub. Some of you will know that we've had major budget cuts this year, and that is life. We have to get on. What I think this meeting today and yesterday shows is that the GCRF program is still alive and kicking. We're ready to work with you as scientists, stakeholders, and governments to move forward in this year of COP26, highlighting the importance of the hub's work. Coming to COP26, November is going to come upon us very quickly. I'm pleased that we've been able to open this discussion already in April and start the discussion with the countries. The engagements from the ministers were hugely important yesterday. Once we've got it online, do go back and listen again to the ministers' statements, demonstrating an amazing commitment and willingness to work on nitrogen in the months ahead in the run-up to COP. And with that, that takes us to our last item, which is tomorrow. We will be having a closed meeting with the governments to discuss how they want to move forward towards COP. And these first 2 days will be informing that discussion. Let's see how we get on with that. But I hope that we will be able to publicly share before too long the conclusions from that government discussion. So with that, I'd like to close. And in closing, we're going to attempt to play the nitrogen song by Grammy Award winner Ricky Keesje as we leave. Ricky prepared this song for the Colombo Declaration launch. And if technology allows, let's give it a hope we can celebrate a discussion about nitrogen as we leave the conference today. So with that, thank you very much. And I'm going to hand over to my colleague to play the video as we close.
Don't know where we're going. The stars way up above us, the earth that lies below us, both hold the key to finding and balancing nitrogen.
This is our nitrogen origin. This is the element on which we depend. This is our vital ingredient, and we can't ignore our nitrogen again. It's everywhere and invisible. Its work goes on unseen, but that doesn't mean we ought to leave it in between issues.
It holds the key to finding balance. Oh,
nitrogen. Oh yeah. This is our nitrogen origin. This is the element on which we depend. This is our vital ingredient, and we can't ignore our nitrogen again.
some people say the heavens were formed from nitrogen.
Well, if that's true, then we have heaven on earth.
So
Thank you, everybody.